Are you tired of doing the same old data manipulations in Excel week after week, month after month? Just to keep the data updated? Are you tired of getting follow-up requests from stakeholders to filter down the data to a particular geography or business segment, requiring you to go through the whole process of updating it again? Would you like to create a report that's more aesthetically pleasing than just rows and columns and cells? Okay, last one. For those of you already using the interactive dashboarding platform, do you want to save a ton of money by using a solution whose licensing cost is already baked into your organization's Microsoft E5 license? If you answered yes to any of those questions, today is the day to learn Microsoft Power BI. In this video, I'll walk you through how to build a Power BI dashboard from scratch. You can make anything from scratch. We'll start by downloading Microsoft Power BI Desktop, which is free. Then we'll import two datasets, a weather dataset with historical weather by day, by city, and a college football dataset with college football games going back to 1936 when the AP poll originated. We'll manipulate the data in Power BI's Power Query Editor and then create columns and measures to further manipulate the data from there. And unlike Excel, this data manipulation only needs to be done one time and can be scheduled from there. We'll then build an interactive dashboard with tables and charts and slicers and filters so that your stakeholders can easily drill into metrics and trends on their own right then and there. And finally, we'll publish your dashboard to Power BI Online and share your dashboard so you can score a touchdown with your stakeholders. Was that too much? I think that was too much. And share your dashboard so you can score some points with your stakeholders. Still too much? And share your dashboard to avoid fumbling? Let's move on. Now, in order to use Power BI, you've got to download Power BI Desktop. That's where we'll actually build the dashboard. And then ultimately, we will publish it to Power BI Online where it can be shared with your stakeholders. So I'm just doing a search for Power BI. Here we have the results. I'm going to click on Power BI Desktop. And I'll put the link in the description, but we would just click on download free and it's going to bring up the Microsoft Store. So you'll download this as a Power BI app and that'll make sure that it's really easy to keep it up to date. You don't have to worry about new versions coming out. Now there is another way to download it. You saw the advanced options there, but that route will require you to constantly download new versions of Power BI when a new version comes out if you want to have the latest version. So I highly recommend doing this through the Microsoft Store. Here we go. Mine is already downloaded, but it'll probably prompt you to install, and then you'll have Power BI Desktop, which is the first step in the process of creating a Power BI dashboard. The first thing we need to do to get ready to build our Power BI dashboard is to download the files that we'll use. And so to do that, head over to valuedrivenanalytics.com, look something like this. And what I want you to do is go to Analytics Training at the top and then click on Intro to Data Analytics. This is where you'll find all the different training sessions for the definitive guide to data analytics. And today we're talking about Power BI. And so you'll go to the Introduction to Power BI option here, click on that, and here is where you'll find the files to download. So there will be a few files here. One, a Python file, a Jupyter notebook. You don't need to download that, but if you're curious how I created the files, the college football files, and the weather file that we'll look at today, that can be found in the Jupyter notebook. So check that out, especially if you know Python. And if you don't know Python, we plan on doing a Python training in the future, so maybe you can come back to that and take a look at it in the future. But that's available if it's of interest. And you'll also be able to find here what you really need to download if you're going to follow along is the actual Excel file with the college football games that the Python job creates, and the weather CSV file that the Python job also creates. Those two files, the Excel file and the CSV file, those are the files that you need to download. And you'll also be able to actually download the final Power BI desktop file if you'd prefer to see what it looks like in the very end as well. So take a look at those, download those, and then you'll be ready for the next step. All right, let's have a look at our two data sets. We're going to look at our college football games data set first. Uh, got them saved in this folder. I always recommend creating a project folders for each project. In this case, the dashboard we're building is a project, and I'm calling it College Football Dashboard. So you can create your own folder, save the two files from the website there, and we're just going to take a look at what one row represents and just have a look at the data before we import it into Power BI. Okay, here's our college football game data set. It is one row per college football game from 1936, which again is when the AP poll started, all the way down to 2023. And I extracted this information on October 20th, so it has games through October 19th. And in the Python script, I actually added called it last refresh date. It's really refreshed through date, so that we'll be able to, I show this on the dashboard as a last refresh date that this is going to have games through 1019. We could eventually create a process to schedule the Python job so it always is bringing in the latest college football games that have happened. So we have a few columns here. We have the season that the football game was played in. So 1936, you can see the game started in September that year. And you will have some games, especially the postseason games, that'll go into 1937, January usually. So keep that in mind, but we've got our season. Season type is going to tell us whether it was a regular season or a postseason game, bowl game essentially. We've got the date of the game as our start date, the home team's conference, the home team's division. Now, eventually, we're going to filter this down to just FBS teams. That's football bowl series, I believe. And that is essentially your Division 1A teams, your premier college football division. So we're seeing the home team's division, their conference, and then the name of the home team. Now, keep in mind the conferences here could change over time. Teams do tend to can change conferences over time. So this will represent what conference they were in when that game was played. We also have the away teams conference, the away teams division, and the away team name. We have how many points the home team scored, how many points the away team scored. I have a column for attendance that's very sparsely populated here. Let's scroll down. Yeah, this is something to out for in any data set. You can have columns that were maybe populated sparsely during a certain time period and not others. So if you're looking at trends in those columns, you might see something that's just a trend correlated with time. So you usually want to rely more on your columns that are continuously populated, or if we wanted to do an analysis on attendance, we could simply calculate the attendance analysis for the time period where attendance really started to be populated consistently. We also have the city state where the game was played. So for instance, Georgia Southern was the away team, Mercer was the home team. That was played in Macon, Georgia. Yep, Ole Miss home game played in Oxford, Mississippi. So it's essentially the home team's city, and we're pulling that in. We're going to ultimately use that in conjunction with the start date to join this data set to our next data set, which is the weather data set. So let's take a look at our weather data set now. Close out of this. Again, college football games is one row per college football game for games going back to 1936. And we're ultimately going to narrow down to games where at least one FBS team was involved, either the home team or the away team or both. But one thing that we'll discover in Power BI is that this API has added in football games from other divisions as well over time. So we'll actually filter this down a little bit more in Power BI. Closing out of the college football game. All right, let's have a look at our weather data set. I'm going to double click on weather. Now this has a lot of rows. It has one row per day going back to 1936, January 1st, 1936, all the way to present for every team that was included in our football games data set. I think there was about 500 cities. So I'm going to a weather API to get the weather for every day for every one of those cities. In some cases, it'll find the weather. In some cases, it won't. In some cases, as we'll see, some of the variables are missing. There could be a few cases where it's inaccurate, but I think in general, it seems to give an accurate temperature. But keep in mind, there could be quite a few missing values here, especially for some of the really early games and early dates in our data set. One thing I found just exploring the data. So for instance, here's Blacksburg, Virginia. That was the one of the cities where games were played. And our weather data API was able to return data from 1994 to present. So any of the games played prior to that in Blacksburg, Virginia won't have any weather associated with it. And you can see there's even some days here where temperature wasn't provided. And there's precipitation, snow, not really included here. We're not going to use those in this analysis. Just pulled them in just in case we wanted to use them. You might decide to build your dashboard baking in some of these other variables. And we have average wind speed that day as well. So we'll just kind of scan through this. I believe since we're using the data in Excel, it's going to get cut off. But when we bring it into Power BI, one very nice thing about Power BI is it doesn't have a row limit. Now, it will get slower the more rows you bring in and the more columns you bring in, but it can usually handle quite a bit of data. So that's a really neat thing about Power BI. As you can see here, we're hitting that 1 million row limit or so. But you can see a few examples here of Des Moines, Iowa. We've got their weather day by day, just columns for temperature, rainfall, snow, and wind speed. Sometimes populated, sometimes not. Doesn't always go back to 1936. In some cases, the city may not have been able to be found at all by the weather API, but that is our weather data set. We're really using this to maybe do a little analysis to see if there's a correlation between a team's performance and the weather. That'll be interesting to look at, but it's an example of it'll allow us to show how to join tables together in Power BI. If you like this video, I hope you'll consider liking it for me. And if you'd like to see more analytics, data science, and leadership training videos, please consider subscribing to the channel. Finally, if you have any questions on what we discussed today, please leave a comment and I'll try to respond to it as soon as possible. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.